England versus South Africa. So South Africa lasted 70 overs more than what England did in the first test, but lost by a bigger margin. Coming up to the first point, obviously Rassie van der Dussen is ruled out of the third test with an injury in the finger. But there's another one that has been kind of a problem for South Africa, and it is Aiden Markram. He has been in Test cricket for 5 years now, and out of five, he has averaged less than 35 in 4 of those years. How have you seen his recent decline?
I wouldn't so much call it a decline as just, a young player struggling with adapting to Test cricket. And, Markram isn't that young anymore. He's, like 25, 26. He's not a young man anymore. Markram's actually a player I followed quite a bit because he was, 'cause I lived in the UAE when the 2014 World Cup was happening, 2014 U19 World Cup was happening, and I went to that final, and Markram was player of the tournament in that tournament. South Africa won, their first ICC event since 1998, and so since then I've had a soft spot for Markram. I've followed him quite a bit, and he always seems to be on the edge of, it's finally clicked. Like when he had that century against Australia in the sandpaper tour in that first test, where pretty much the rest of the entire rest of the team imploded. He made 170 while getting totally peppered by the Australians all innings for running out de Villiers. That I thought that was the moment. He's going to really kick on from here, but he just never did. And every so often he gets another one of those moments, and he just never does. And at some point, like he is 20. He's in his mid-20s. If he gets dropped, it's not the end of the world, and I think that's probably what should happen to him now. Get jettisoned out of the side for a little bit, figure some stuff out. The South African domestic season's starting soon. He could he could play a few first-class games away from the spotlight. We're in an age now where A tours are starting to come back. You could probably, hop on for one of those. You can join some T20 leagues and just, get into a different headspace. And then, in a year and 2 years, maybe you'll be ready to come back, refreshed, a new outlook. It's not the end of the world if you don't play Test cricket for a couple of years at 27. Players come back, you're 29, 30, and have a solid few years, and that's totally okay. And I think that's probably what Markram needs to do now. Just figure some stuff out, figure out how he wants to play and how he should play, and then once he's ready, he can come back.
Yes, as one of our friends said, Ryan Rickelton is right there, so you can play him. But
Yeah.
there's another point about Markram that I have noticed is usually he is a very aggressive player, as we have already seen him play in the T20s. He's one of the best in the recent times, and seems like the same approach has sometimes seeped into his test batting as well. We saw in this test only both of his dismissals were kind of induced by the fact that he was trying to be aggressive when his team was kind of in a fishy position, and ultimately it led to his dismissals as well. So do you think it is something that is an area of improvement for him?
Yeah, like obviously anything that'll help you score more runs is an area of improvement. But again, it comes back to like, how does South Africa want to play? How does Markram want to play? And how does he fit into that? So, if South Africa want to go full baseball, which I don't think they do, then this is something he needs to cut out. He needs to focus more. And how do you practice that? You practice that by, playing some more first-class cricket away from the spotlight. And, if South Africa wants to play in a more reckless style, and Markram wants to play in that reckless style and he fits in with it, then you just have to take these as part of that. So, it'll depend on what South Africa see for him and what he sees for himself. But, there's not always one way to play cricket. But if Markram doesn't fit into the way that South Africa wants to play, then he does need to re-examine things and take some time out to be able to prepare to play in that way that the team wants to.
And a weird fact, South Africa scored what 326 in the last game, They scored 320 in this game, actually 330, but it was across 2 innings. And that brings me to another point, which is the decision to bat first on a gloomy day against James Anderson. Obviously, we have seen that the history says that Old Trafford is the best to bat in the first innings. Now, there's been highest the average score has been around 320. What did you make of the whole decision? Because as we have seen, South African batting is kind of still very mercurial. So, do you think it was the right decision by Dean Elgar? Should he have prioritized the past, or maybe he should have seen the present conditions and be gone with that?
I think any decision made on like the historically this ground is good for whatever, I think that's silly to follow because that doesn't really tell you what the ground is right now. It doesn't matter what the average score is since 1980. You're not playing on one of those pitches from between now and 1980. You're playing on a pitch now. And even in with that average score, that average percentage score, you're going to get a lot of low scores as well. So, it it's being held up by some things and held down by some things. So you could get either or. So you shouldn't base your decisions based on that. How it's not how statistics work. Every pitch is an independent event. So you base your decision on what you see in front of you then and there. I don't know what Elgar saw on the pitch that made him want to bat first. And I just think, like in general, South Africa had pretty poor tactics throughout the game, and that probably highlights some of Elgar's maybe not inexperience as captain because like he's a new captain at Test level, but he has captained other sides before, and he is one of the senior citizens of the team pretty much. But yeah, just like it was a total misplay to bat first on this pitch. But even after that, when South Africa was bowling, when South Africa even was batting, some of the decisions they made were quite poor, and that does fall on Elgar and Boucher. And compared with they played the first match really well. They played the first test really well from a tactical perspective. They did everything right, from the way they approached the media to the things they did on the field. But in the second test, they just got totally outplayed on the field and in the head. And it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back for the third test. If they've learned from some of their mistakes, if they, decide to do things a little differently. Another thing South Africa did right was they dropped one of their seamers from the first test and played a second spinner, which ended up not paying off. And I don't think the pitch was really that conducive for spin.
Now that you've already answered the question about Simon Harmer for Janssen, I'll ask you a different thing. So as we saw in the first test, South Africa, even though they got 320 odd in their first innings, we did see their middle order being, prone to collapses. As we saw, it was more of a lower order contribution that took them to that score. And I think the same thing happened here as well. So, do you think it was, it has kind of put them in a spot where they are much, in a much more lower position right now than England? Because obviously England has won the test, so they would be high on the morale. But we know both the teams have batting that is kind of prone to collapse. But seems like England have their heads up in that particular department now.
Yeah, England will be the team going into the final test with more confidence, but I don't think it'll be that hard for South Africa to motivate themselves. Like they did beat England quite badly just 2 tests ago, and the final test is at the Oval, isn't it? So they're back in London, which is the ground they won in last time, the city they won in last time. So if you don't, as a coach, what you're going to tell your players, if they don't think too hard about it, you can say anything and it'll motivate them. So I don't think like the morale issue will be that big of a deal. What will matter is once the game starts and once the pressure starts to build on one team, the morale will really come into play then. If a team has a bad innings, how do they just do their heads cave in and the whole inning and the whole match follows from there, or do they fight back and try try and claw their way back into it. That'll be interesting to see as we get to the final test